So we're going to go ahead and get started into the content. Again, you're here for identify, standardize, and scale the success of your top reps. So today's event is sponsored by Atrium and Accord. I'm going to let Pete say a few things about Atrium, and then Ross say a couple words about Accord.
Yeah, for sure. Hey folks, my name is Pete Kazanjy. I'm one of the founders of Atrium. We make data-driven sales management software that helps sales managers, leaders, and reps use metrics to improve performance. One of the cool things about Atrium is that it's extraordinarily quick to set up. It takes about 5 minutes to set up a free Atrium account. And you can have a world-class metrics harness being automatically monitored for areas of outperformance and areas of underperformance, so you can be aware of areas where you need to intervene and fix things to make your team better. So that's us.
Awesome. Ross?
Cool. Accord is a customer-facing collaboration platform for B2B sales and onboarding, where you can basically invite customers to their ideal buying journey to help win deals and onboard customers faster. So that's what we do. Also want to give Todd a chance to share what Champify is doing new on the scene.
Yes, definitely. Todd, you can share what Champify is doing now, and then we'll go ahead and pop into introductions.
Awesome. Appreciate that, Hannah. Appreciate that, Ross. Champify's B2B helps B2B revenue teams drive high quality pipeline by operationalizing the entire channel to sell to repeat customers. So ex-buyers and users, as they're changing jobs, make it super easy for your reps to get back in touch with them, measure what's working, and never miss one of those bluebird opportunities again.
Amazing. Love to hear it. I'm sharing the links to everything in the chat. And then let's go ahead and dive into introductions. Pete, Ross, and Todd, would love for you to say a little bit about yourselves, why you are experienced and an expert on this topic. And I'm actually going to head behind the scenes and let Pete drive the show from here. So Pete, take us into some introductions, please.
All right, cool. Well, Ross, why don't we start with you? Age before beauty and all that.
Yeah, I definitely have a slightly less interesting background than you, but Ross Rich, CEO and co-founder of Accord. Before founding Accord, I was at Stripe for about 5 years, as they were actually starting to have conversations with customers for the first time. Went from
weird
self-serve, crazy idea they had back in 2015, went from a purely self-serve API, famously just on the website, grew to tens of thousands of customers, decided to have some conversations with folks. So I joined, we were still on user voice and Zendesk, hadn't quite made the shift to email and Salesforce, and saw that go from 3 of us to 500 plus global sales org, which was a really cool experience. And then before then was in the music industry at Columbia Records, but that's for another time and another webinar.
Nice. And then Todd?
Yeah, so I was the first sales, similar to Ross, was very early at Heap. Was the first sales rep there, 6th employee. Spent 6 years there. Left when they were past 300 employees. The last 3 years there was as VP of sales. I spent a year in venture at Unusual Ventures as an operator in residence, helping early stage founders with all things go to market. And then for the last 6 months, been working on Champify as founder and CEO. We just formally launched about 7-8 weeks ago, and obviously heads down on this now.
Exciting, love it. And folks, for people who don't know me, my name's Pete Kazanjy. I'm one of the founders of Atrium. As noted earlier, Atrium makes data-driven sales management software. Been working on this for a few years. I started in startups and sales about a little more than a decade ago with my first software company called TalentBin. Was a recruiting software company that was acquired by Monster Worldwide in 2014, and so subsequent to that, that was kind of where I got my first experience in kind of doing sales management, et cetera. My background's in product marketing and product management. Then I was our first seller at TalentBin, our first sales manager, sales leader. And then when we were acquired by Monster Worldwide, I was responsible for new product sales for a 600-person sales organization. Subsequent to that, ended up writing a book on startup sales called Founding Sales, and then also started the nation's largest sales operations and leadership community, Modern Sales Pros. So just a little thinking about sales excellence here and there just a bit. I think one thing wanted to share with folks, one of the things that we're really passionate about here at Atrium, in addition to data-driven sales management, is just making people better at sales management in general, so much so that we actually host a complimentary sales management and leadership boot camps. They're actually two different ones. We started out doing it for our customers, but now we offer it to the community at large. All we ask for, and it's a half-day virtual boot camp with Richard Harris, who's absolutely fantastic. About 4 or 5 hours of all the like sales management and sales leadership best practices. Two different ones, one for each persona type. So if you want to sign up for that, I think we're going to drop a sign up in the chat here. All we ask for in exchange is a quick discovery call with our sales team. Wonderful. So today, and we'll drop the slides after this and facilitate our discussion, but what we're going to be doing today is talking about high performers. How do we identify identify the success of top performers, how to standardize that, excuse me, and then scale it up, right? That's kind of the business that we're all in as sales managers and sales leaders here. So those are the topics we're going to be covering. Please do use the chat and the Q&A in order to ask us questions as we kind of cruise along here. We'll be as responsive as possible there. So I think I'll kind of start with you, Ross, when when you are thinking about you guys as customers, and at this point you guys have a pretty sweet sample size of folks that you work with. What do you see as kind of best practices around identifying kind of like those bright sparks of identifying where top performance is happening, because that's the first step in the path to replicating it.
Yeah, just to clarify, in terms of like best process stuff or like best reps, just to make sure
all the above.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe, think about two things. I think one, I think it's really, and as someone who's recently been, hiring, growing our sales team, it's really, really hard to pick out a top rep from the best, because salespeople are salespeople, whether they're the best or not, pretty good at talking. It's very different from different roles. It's really hard to separate that top, 1 out of every 10 rep. Pete, like the Seans of the world from the rest, right? Like a lot of people like look and act and walk the same. It's really, really hard. And I haven't quite cracked that. So I'm actually really excited to hear Todd, yours and Pete's, your thoughts on how to kind of pick that out of the interview cycle. But I think once you have people in seat, I think that's where I've gotten a lot of data points working with our 100+ customers and, exponentially more sales reps on what the best reps actually look like once they're at the company. And I think the best reps have this perfect balance of the art and science of sales. I think they're both great relationship builders in terms of super high EQ and building trust and rapport with customers, but also follow a very stringent process. So they're able to really spend time focusing on customers' problems, then having to keep in their mind the process. So they have that like the back of their hand. They never skip a step. They absolutely nail every single piece of the customer journey. And they spend most of their time on the extra stuff, adding a ton of value for customers. So that's kind of what I've seen. I think, again, like they're text expanders. They have like all their little tools and things that they've built into their process so they can really focus on coming up with creative solutions with clients.
Nice. And then Todd, when you were managing teams at Heap, what were the mechanisms that you used to kind of identify outperformance and kind of like the roots of that outperformance?
Yeah, I think there's two ways. I think in the beginning, there's some informal or qualitative ways, like who is the team going to? Who are new hires going to when they're trying to learn? Who are they asking for advice? Who are the people that are constantly listening to their gong calls or whatever that may be? Who are they coming to with questions? I think as you grow a little bit, that starts to change, and it may come out in a QBR in a planning session where you're seeing really an outlier in some key category. Right. So you may see someone that is an outlier in terms of their average deal size or win rate, or someone that's an outlier in terms of their pipe coverage or constant new business meetings. Right. And then like finding what that one thing is that's actually driving them to be the top performer. right? Because I think if you just look at it kind of peanut butter style, it's really hard to figure out what that person is doing well. There's usually an outlier on the PG side or on the deal size or cycle side.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that would be what I would recommend there as well, is just like, I mean, of course, my answer to this is going to be metrics, right? Because what you should be able to do is I mean, but not just like the lagging indicators too, right? Like it's easy to see someone who's like outperforming from a booking standpoint, or an SDR who's outperforming from an opportunity creation standpoint. But I think what our goal as managers is to debug what it is that is making them outperformant, and like isolate that, right? Kind of like bottle it, if you will. Because you'd be shocked, like the creativity that that people come up with, right? Because this is, you know, one of the cool things about salespeople is I like to describe them as like really kind of smart microeconomic actors, right? Because they have every incentive to puzzle through things and make things more, you know, more efficient, like sell more faster, right? Or like, you know, create more ops faster or what have you. And so at least if you're hiring sharp, you know, sharp folks who can reason against that, they're going to come up with kind of cool hacks there, right? So it's and actually we actually have these like laminated metrics driver trees where you can kind of see like the upstream metrics that kind of drive to downstream outcomes. But like for AEs, that might be, okay, cool. You got somebody who's outperforming from a booking standpoint. Where's that coming from? Is it because they're just like closing more deals, like way more wins? Or is it just like, or is it a substantially higher average selling price? Or are they just like, is their deal cycle just crazy like they're just running it through like super fast and running up the score? And then like, so figure out what that is and then go to the next step above it, right? Like, oh, actually they're closing way more deals, right? ASP is the same as everybody else's. Okay, cool. What is driving more wins? Is it just they have like a ton more at bats, right? Like kind of Todd was saying before, they're just like a pipe gen machine and they're having 10, you know, first meetings a week or something like that, you know, above and beyond what's being provided by marketing or SDR. Or alternatively, do they just have like a bananas win rate, right? Where like for whatever reason, their conversion rate is just like astronomical, right? So figure out whatever it is that like, so essentially to like narrow the scope to where their outperformance is coming from. And it might be a little bit of a, you might be a blend of that, like, oh, it's like win rate is a little bit better and like ASP is a little bit better, but just kind of understanding what that is, because then what you can do is you can investigate and say, hey, like, where is this outperformant win rate coming from? Or where is this and sometimes it's basic stuff, right? Like, whoa, your ASP is a lot higher, is like 25% higher than everybody else's. Where's that coming from? Oh, you know, I just recommend 5 seats instead of 4. It's like so many times it's like literally that, like, oh, I put together this slide right here, right? Like, you know, instead of it being like, how many seats do you want? I just show up with the recommendation here and they go that one, right?
Yeah, you're like, shit, I wish a quarter ago I had everyone do this and then we would have been at 20% higher revenue in the quarter.
It's always that way. Yeah, I mean, it's like hindsight's always going to be 2020, but like it's one of those things where, you know, best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. Second best time is right now. And so what you're doing is you identify these things and then you can kind of systematize it afterwards. But like that's the mechanism by which you just kind of like go upstream, if you will, to kind of like suss that out. And you know, doing that metrically is something that can be done a little bit, like it's kind of necessitated as you get to larger sizes of sales organization, like more than 5 or 10 or whatever, because I call it like you can't keep it in your head anymore. I would be curious what you guys' take is on like how to identify that in like that when you're kind of like closer to the metal. Because like Todd, how many reps do you guys have right now at Champify?
We're still all founder sales right now. So no,
so
no
it's just like you, right? Is it just you taking all the ops, or is it another?
There's 2 of us. Yeah, there's 3 founders. 2 of us are kind of doing the sales.
Commercial. Yeah, so I think that that's actually a really, I mean, I think that's an important time period, right? To kind of figure out what's working and what's not yet. That like 2, 3, 4, or 5. What are kind of ways that you guys have seen to identify, like when either A, you have small sample sizes, or B, like small sample sizes because either A, not that many reps, or B, maybe not that many cycles. I think we all have the benefit of kind of having like a mid-market sales motion. So like the good news is like it's like lots of at bats versus, you know, someone selling like Workday, like someone selling the first 5 deals of Workday. Geez Louise. But like low sample sizes, what are kind of ways you guys have seen to kind of like detect outperformance in low sample sizes?
I think the short answer is we don't know yet. I think, like you said, we are lucky enough to be in, you know, doing deals with 30, 45, 60-day cycles. So like we are learning really quickly. I think it's just us starting to measure those key things. So like in another 90 days, we can look and say, okay, across 40 deals, here's what we're seeing. I think that the part that stood out to me, Pete, what you said, and this was really important in the Heap days was, you know, you find that metric, right? Because just looking at quota attainment isn't enough. So what is the metric that's the outlier? And then I think the key is from there, go learn, right? So like we had some amazing prospectors. And what that means is, you know, it's not just that she's leading an activity. What you might find, getting to your point of creativity, that they're doing something completely novel on nurturing customers, asking for referrals, going after a whole new channel, running their own webinars. Like go look qual, quant, and just ask them, spend time with them, shadow them, and then just ask, and you'll find that they're doing things that you can very easily replicate and teach people. And I think in the remote world, it's harder than ever to do that. So like you have to be more diligent about spending your time on it.
Yeah, I can share a story of something that we kind of found there with Atrium. I mean, we don't have like a super baby sales organization. We have, I think it's like 11 AEs and like 7 SDRs or so. But one of our SDRs who's recently promoted to an account executive, a guy named Trent, one of the things that we noticed, so one of the things you can measure in Atrium is essentially how many opportunities get to a certain stage. We call them stage attainments, which is, you know, can be a very important thing because like usually like different stages are important in your sales motion. In our case, we have you can set up a free Atrium account. We always sell on other people's data. And so we call that, like, I think we call it data live as the stage, right? And one of the things that we noticed was that there was this one SDR whose conversion rate from opportunity creation to data live. Again, the SDR is not responsible for like getting someone to turn on an account. That's an AE's job. But there was a situation where this SDR, like the ops that he sourced, were like getting to data live just like totally out of whack with everybody else's, and we're like, what the hell is going on here? And so what we found was what he was doing was when he was scheduling with the prospect, he was doing a little bit of like what we call asynchronous discovery, where someone would be like, yeah, you know, I'm down to have a meeting, etc. He would hit him with like a set of disco questions, very lightweight, right? Like, hey, which of these are like interesting to you, potentially top priorities? And people would just like choose from the Chinese menu, like, oh yeah, this one and this one is top of mind. And then what he would do is he would come back with some resources from our marketing website and be like, hey, that's really awesome. I'll make sure that the account executive addresses those. Here's some materials ahead of time. So essentially what was happening is he was pulling that selling behavior forward even pre-meeting. And what it was doing is it was priming the prospect to like get in the right frame of mind, so as they were, you know, all the more receptive to the notion of turning on an account when they had the discovery meeting with the AE. And the only way that we would have been able to, the only reason why we were able to figure that out was because we were measuring this output thing, this quality output thing for the SDRs. You guys have other examples of that?
How do you get the rest of the team to do that? How do you, like, that's the big question too, right? Is like, okay, now you've identified this thing, right? And it's like, okay, this is figuring it out, having the right meetings. Now, how do you get the 10 other people plus the people that you're onboarding to do just that right away? I'm curious to, hear, you know, you guys have both led larger teams. Like, how do you get people to do that then?
Consistify, Todd. I mean, you guys had, I think at this point, Heap's probably got like 80 sellers. I don't know how big they were when you were there, but you know, getting all the kayakers kayaking in the same direction is always a challenge.
Yeah, when I left, there was like 50 reps. So it was definitely a challenge for us, because in the beginning, it's like, cool, you saw what rep A did. Now just start doing that on your call like this afternoon, right? When it's 50 people in different regions, it's harder. I think what we found was, going back to that PG example or to Pete's example of an SDR kind of taking this a little bit further down the funnel, we would basically chunk out like, what are the key behaviors that person's doing? What do we have to train and enable on? Maybe start with just that team. Like, hey, this person is doing this really well. Let's have the rest of this team in a 5-8 person setting start doing it.
Yeah.
From there, you can figure out what are the most important things and then roll it out at a, an SDR wide function. And I think with any type of changing, it's all about, are we measuring it? Do we have a reinforcement plan? Are we celebrating the people that are doing it well? And then, you're looking for the next iteration.
Yeah, for sure. I can kind of share, like, use that one kind of case study of Trent's innovation as an example there. I think what you want to do is you want to take the thing that someone innovated and like they probably have their own like workflow process that's probably not super like optimized and like made efficient, right? And so in this and then moreover probably because they're pretty creative, they're probably used to doing it, whereas somebody else is like learning it might have some friction on it. So to use this example, one, we templated it, right? So you just added it. We use Outreach and SalesLoft as sales engagement tools because why not have both? Our SDR team uses Outreach, our AE team uses SalesLoft. We play nice with everyone. So on like templatize it on the Outreach side, right? When somebody books, we've got that, what we call the pre-disco template. Hey, that's really great. Here you go, snippet, right? And then, we have our marketing site that has all of our various assets, relying on the SDR to like go to the marketing site and then like tie together the the pain and the asset. Why leave that as an exercise to the individual, right? Just there's 7 pre-disco questions right here, just like cool. When they come back, here are the things that are associated with that, and then you just drive compliance on that as well. In our case, we actually do this kind of clever thing that we have email listservs. One is called sales engineering and one is called SDR engineering that our reps CC on, and essentially their managers sit on that. It actually is really helpful for onboarding new reps because what they can do is they can kind of see how more tenured reps are communicating with customers at different parts of the life cycle. And we do the same thing with SDRs as well. But the point is, it allows you to like dip into workflow and kind of like sample. It's kind of like call listening, but instead you're email listening, if you will. And so and then the lagging indicator there, of course, would be like, does everybody else's metric for whatever that metric was get to the same level as, like in this case, does everybody's metric around data live sourcing, right? Like pilot sourcing, get to the same level as Trent's. So that's kind of like the workflow there, right? And then once you get everyone to that level, then like you find the next constraint, you just do it again, right? Yeah. How what have you seen, Ross? I mean, that's SDR examples. What have you seen on the AE side?
Yeah, I found there to be like 2 very different types of sales organizations in terms of being able to copy what the best reps are doing. I would say there's these more junior mid-level managers, like frontline managers and directors, who maybe they came up as the top rep and don't have a lot of experience there, and like, hey, I don't want to force my team to do things. I want everyone to come up with this organically, and it's like their own style and all this stuff. And then I've seen like the very prescriptive, like, I've been around, this is the best way to sell and to sell this thing. And I'm going to take from the top folks here and I'm going to do some deals myself early on. And I'm going to be really prescriptive. I find that team, the latter, to be 100 times more effective in terms of helping others. And it's funny because it's really counterintuitive. You're helping the team the most when you're being ultra prescriptive, because there's so much that happens outside of process that you need to think about. That's what I was saying. Like, I freaking love the prescriptive process because then I can work the most closely and unique stuff with my customer. And that's where the creativity should come, not the process. Yes. Once you're past 3, 4, 5 reps, it should be, this is what we do in this freaking segment that we're selling to. Yes, there's new things, and maybe it's 1 or 2 reps working on that, or one of the founders or sales managers, but like in the stuff that we know, we do that. Yes, optimizing on the edges, exactly. that's the biggest challenge that I've seen from a lot of managers lately. We've seen this explosion of B2B sales and tech, and there's a lot of junior folks out there that I think are conflating like, micromanagement and process. Having a clear playbook that people need to stick to is not micromanagement. It helps your team.
No. Well,
Yes.
the reason why the reason why the New England Patriots are so consistently kick everyone's ass in the Super Bowl is because everybody just makes up their own plays, right?
Yeah.
No,
Yeah, exactly.
like absolutely not. Absolutely not, right? Like that is not how that works. And yeah, this is just like a constant area of like hilarity to me around like, it's you are not here to do interpretive dance, right? You are here, and especially when like I like to use sports metaphors for these things because it's very instructive, right? Like, there are like high pressure environments where you have to follow, like where you're working against an, oftentimes you're working, with somebody who's reacting to what you're reacting, right? And you're trying to achieve a goal. And like top performing players, when they join a new team, they learn the playbook. They don't say like, well, I don't know, Mr. Belichick, with all due respect, the way that we did this on the Chargers, a little different than you had. It's like, no, man, like you show up and like you learn the plays, and then you can start innovating at the edges once you have earned the right for that. And then moreover, like just re-deriving everything from zero is just like absolutely bananas. Like, why would you not want to stand on the shoulders of like every single close lost opportunity and every single close won opportunity? Like information was created there, right? So like, why would you not want to sit on top of the shoulders of all the reps who came before you and took all these like terrible lumps? Like, why relearn like those hard won lessons? Todd, what were your biggest experiences there at Heap?
I think there's a couple things that are coming up that are making me think. Like, so I 100% agree with like the New England Patriots analogy. I think where a lot of new managers and new leaders struggle is they have the right intentions by setting this process and saying follow this process, but they don't explain why. Right? Like, hey, here's how we got to this process. It's based on the last 150 deals, these losses, these wins, these consistent performers. That's why we're telling you to do this. Like early in my career, I was like, I don't need a playbook. Like I know how to do this thing. And like as I got some more experience, I was like, wait, there's a reason why we're doing it this way. And I think that the more you can explain the why and the data that went into it, like these reps are smart. Like they want to see the numbers on how you got to these decisions. And when you can explain that, the ability to get people to adopt is a lot higher.
Yeah, that's the good bridge that I think that I've seen the best, again, like these more experienced, say like director level start to really do this is why. I think that's like the gap. Either you're not telling them what to do or you're forcing them. And the great middle ground is like, hey, this is what we've learned. Let's have this meeting. Let's have someone on my team, not me, who's the top person doing this, so they share with the team, and then you can kind of drive that adoption. That's why I forget which one of you mentioned this, but like the best way to drive new behaviors I've seen is from working with 2 or 3 of the top sellers that everyone looks to, nailing that, bringing that to the launch, versus it either feeling super top down and very unplugged to what the day-to-day life is as a rep at the company.
Yeah.
Or the opposite, which is like, hey, we're kind of doing all this stuff and it always feels like 7 initiatives are going on, but like you can do it, but also you don't have to. Yeah.
I want to come back to this idea of sales management as selling, which is kind of what you just kind of alluded to a little bit there. But I thought that Todd had an absolutely fantastic question here to the panelists, and I'm going to repeat it here. What if a winning player joins a losing team? Sometimes the playbook is garbage. I think that's right. Now, the thing that still needs to happen there is the person who's joining the. So first of all, I would say in a situation like that, it's probably, I would imagine it's probably a sales leader, right? And I think for the most part, what we have been talking about, that's an environment in which a sales leader's job is to come in and like refactor refactor. That's usually less the the charter of an individual contributor that's being added, not 100% of the time. But what I would say there is the first step that needs to happen is to understand why the existing stuff is not working, versus, because again, there's a number of different ways why you can have low bookings attainment. It could be a low win rate. It could be low at bats. It could be, bad ASP. So why is it, why is the existing playbook not there? Because if you just show up with a different playbook, from the Chargers coming over to the Patriots or what have you, and it just turns out that and you try to shove that existing playbook into a new market, going from a garbage playbook to a garbage playbook is actually not that's not a recipe for success there. And so really what it kind of comes down to is debugging. Right. And so the way that you have to do that first is to understand Ross is going to get attacked by his dog. Have the dog come join us.
I know, she's like starting to bark. I'm like, shh.
Well, she wants to talk about playbooks, man. But the most important, this is, as a seller and as a leader, what you really need to do in the first 60 to 90 days is come in and understand the existing playbook and run those deals with that playbook. And maybe very quickly you'll identify the shortfall there, oh, okay, we're not getting to power, or oh, that's our pricing is such that there's if we're targeting these titles right here, of course our win rates are crap, because we're talking to these people right here who have low budgetary authority. We got to have a message, or we got to start higher, or we got to figure out a way to get this ASP a little bit lower when we enter the whatever the hypothesis is. You're gonna form that hypothesis by running some ops initially yourself. Todd, Ross, what are your reactions to this question?
Todd's question, I think alludes to an enterprise seller coming in as well, which is a whole different framing. The way I'd approach it is, hey, I've come in, I observed XYZ through this many calls, this many shadowing. I've also tried the playbook through this many opportunities. And I think what it comes down to at this point is, usually there's smart leaders there that have been thinking about these problems a lot longer than you have. Exactly. And I think that you need to go there and say, hey, I've observed this, I've tried this. Here's the 5 or 8 different tweaks I think we can make before I start trying to go rogue and implement them. Have we done this? Have we tried this? Do we know that this won't work? And I think that's important before you go starting these things, because 30 days in, you don't know everything yet. You don't know why they're doing things the way they are. So that's how I'd approach it.
Yeah, that would be really dangerous. Jump in and be like, well, obviously didn't happen. It's yeah, we tried that for 6 months and we totally, ran into this buzzsaw right here. Glad you asked.
Totally. I mean, I was honestly the worst at this as being a rep. I didn't understand.
Shocking.
I was more junior in my career. I was this is the thing that we should be doing. And it takes selling. Pete, you mentioned as a manager, you're both selling below and you're selling above. I think that's the way that was a very helpful reframing to me. Unfortunately, after I was out of that position, is approach your team like you would a prospect. And that's a very helpful frame of mind. I wouldn't just say, do this or this isn't working. I'd be yes, exactly, Todd, what you mentioned. This is what I saw. These are the data points that I have. I've spent the time to put it together, and I'm not looking for an answer right now. Let me explain it to you over a call or over the one-on-one. So next one, we can get into it. I think that would be a really, really effective way of doing it and approaching it, not I'm annoyed, but I'm trying to get to the best outcome for our team and the company. And this is, as someone coming in with fresh eyes, this is what I'm seeing. And that's kind of what I would do. Also, yeah, there's a lot of, I think most of the playbooks that I see are very long, don't get iterated or used by the team because of how much is packed into there. Yeah. And I would say just overall suggestion for anyone thinking about these types of playbooks is make it as short as possible because it needs to be a living document. And if you have key milestones, like map it out to your Salesforce stages of the buying journey and have like max 3 things in each stage. If you have like 4 or 5 stages, max the customer milestones that you need to cross off to be successful and go through that process. Because you're never going to go back to that thing. You're going to create a brand new one like 12 months later, once it's like, this thing doesn't matter at all. I know, Pete, you guys do one of the best jobs I've ever seen from having a living, breathing playbook that you guys are constantly iterating on. It's very challenging to do.
Well, I think the way that we did that was like, we have like a narrative based playbook over here, right? I mean, it's like, I mean, the sales playbook isn't necessarily like, you know, a 30-page like Google Doc or like, you know, Notion doc or whatever. It's like a mishmash of stuff. It's like these slides and like, you know, these personas and right? I mean, usually like built by accretion, but like even imagine you have like, you do a good job and you pull all that stuff together, it becomes this like 30-page document with like wonderful like screenshots of slides and so on and so forth. No one's coming back to that. Like that's something you read during onboarding and like maybe come back to and like hyperlink to or whatever. Nobody's using that operationally when they're in pipe review and they're like, oh yeah, you know what? I should go to the exit criteria for, you know, I should go to page 25 or whatever. Instead, it needs to just be like a freaking checklist, right? And that's like, I mean, we're huge Accord users and we use the hell out of it for exactly this use case, right? Where it's just like operationalized. Right, it's just a checklist right there, and you can kind of see exactly like, oh yeah, in this situation right here, I should do X, Y, Z. And I think that what ends up being, and then what ends up happening is it is a living document as well. So when you identify, you know, areas of innovation, right, like, oh cool, this person right here was doing X, Y, Z. We talked about that in a couple team meetings. We did a little bit of like a prototype on it. We had a couple other reps run like doing that as well. And then we said, actually, you know what? We're going to put that in the playbook right there. We're going to update our selling software, so to speak. But then it's the checklist right there. Like the rep doesn't have to, oh, remember we talked about that XYZ. Literally when they're just like going through their checklist, they hit that, to do, and it's right there in front of them. Right. Todd, how did you guys do that at Heap when you had like way more reps?
Very similar to what you said. I think, this word like playbook gets thrown around a lot. And I think it's like this created thing that, like you said, Pete, it's used in the onboarding. You do some like initial training around it, and then it kind of sits there and collects dust. And I'd like to say like we were amazing at updating and everyone used it, but that just wasn't the reality. I think you have to meet reps where they are and like figure out what's most important at what part of the cycle and what are you trying to improve or keep top of mind, right? So like if it's all about, we're having trouble converting first meetings to stage 2, then like we're going to go deep on that and focus the training and effort on it. And then somewhere else in the funnel is going to like inherently get a little bit worse, and that's the focus later. And then it's coming up with this balance of meeting them where they are in terms of like Salesforce required fields or notifications in Slack on new opportunities. I think you have to, I said it 3 times, just meet them where they are, focus on slight improvements at each time, because expecting a rep through all their meetings to go back to the playbook and figure it out on their own, it's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
Doing it in workflow is important.
That's what we found. I mean, I spent years trying to solve this at Stripe, and it would either be, a training that would like go in here and one out the other. If you weren't one of the top 1 or 2 reps, that would just like soak it up. And then we tried it with Salesforce stages, exit criteria, all this stuff, the laminates, the Confluence pages, and like you guys said, like no one's going back to that. So like if you are going to do that, put it in something that is like super digestible, so you can go back and then add the details around the thing that we're working on now or do the specific trainings. But I've also found that if it's not work that's customer facing, it's extra work for reps. So like how can you just also put in implicitly this training into the customer facing stuff that you're doing? I
think the way you said it, Pete, is this, you use something like Accord, you have that built in, right? And it's like, that just makes following the process a lot easier. And if people are going to riff from it, they're at least starting from where you want them to start.
Yeah, I think what ends up being kind of important. So first, like early stage and also the scaling of sales organizations is all about like, it's like applied revenue science, where you're figuring out at a bench scale, like how to execute the reaction, right? Like just kind of everyone remember to like high school chemistry, right? Where like you're doing it at a bench scale initially to kind of make that turn like lead into gold. And then what you do is you then scale it up, right? Like industrial scale. And so once you've then scaled it up, so how do you do that, right? So you figure out what the process is, what the right, selling the right order of operations, et cetera. Then you turn it into a recipe. So then you have to drive, that's easy and not like over here collecting dust, as Todd says. But then once you've scaled up, you need to instrument to make sure that, because now what you've got is this factory, right, with a bunch of assembly lines. And like the worst possible thing would be to have one of the assembly lines go haywire. And so you would say like, oh, well, like, but they got the recipe. They're just following the recipe. Oh, unfortunately, sellers are not machines, right? And the reason why is because we need our sellers to be smart and charismatic and communicative and creative, because like that's what they're dealing with their counterparties, is like navigating Byzantine political interactions in like in their customers or whatever. Like, so we need our reps to be amazing at that, but that comes along with this downside, which is that reps are squishy, like all human beings. And so then what you have to do is you have to really instrument to make sure that like any given assembly line is like not going haywire there. And so that's, I think the scaling piece is cool. Like give them a recipe that they can follow, give them a recipe that they can follow, but then also instrument that well. And so what that means is like people think about this on an opportunity level, where it's like, there's like entry criteria and exit criteria, and maybe there's a bunch of validation rules and all sorts of like, all the sort of fun things that gives sales operations a fun name with sellers. But then there's also like the metrical based version of that as well, where like, hey, look, we have an expectation that you should be having this, like if we know that the playbook calls for this many pilots to be started, well, then we should measure that on a monthly basis, right? And then we know that if you're following the playbook appropriately, your win rate out of pilot or out of proposal, like your win rate out of proposal should be 80%. We should measure that, and we should set a goal on that. And if it's under that, that tells me that someone's not following their playbook, right? We can't just like trust that they're following the playbook because it's been put in front of them. Where have you guys seen folks doing a good job of like instrumenting to make sure that like compliance is happening there, so people aren't going rogue?
Yeah, some of the best stuff that I've seen is honestly going back to basics of like the daily stand up, or like once or twice a week, like let's go through every single deal and let's talk about what's happening now. Like, can you give a great update, all that kind of stuff. So it's like really basic stuff. And I mean, we have a lot of overlap with Atrium customers, and they're the best people are usually investing in it from the start. The best people are like, what was the company, like a Sparrow with Robbie at it? You know what I'm talking about, Pete?
Love Robbie. Yeah,
yeah.
he's
So like
fantastic.
people that are like
having dinner with him this week.
People that have built teams before, and they're like, hey, I know once we get past even that, again, that's like 3 to 5 figure it out type reps, every deal freaking matters. You're spending a ton of money on obviously product development early on. You're spending a ton of money on marketing, top of funnel brand. Once you get deals in reps' hands, we need to treat this like gold. And I've seen those types of teams that approach it that way. And like, let's talk about every single deal. There's something to learn from every opportunity that's going through the pipeline, every won deal, every lost deal. And the pace of iteration and how the team is learning together is just so crazy in those organizations. But it comes from the very, very top. Like, you can just hire the best reps, all these people, blah, blah, blah. Like, you're never going to be like what we're talking about this session, like replicating those folks, unless you do the things like Pete's teams does, which is like CC or BCC a listserv, which is like, hey, this is literally how we talk to customers. You can take out the best lines. Like, it's this obsession with continuously iterating and working on our go-to-market motion. And hopefully every month or every quarter, you're like, shit, if we did this last month or last quarter, that's 20% more revenue. And you're just constantly doing that. And it's really hard. with so many things going on, especially in high growth startups. But that's what it takes.
Yeah. Todd, do you have any closing thoughts for us?
This closing thoughts actually kind of relates back to how we started this. I think the way you said it best is Pete, and or early Pete, and you kind of have this playbook, right? And kind of embedding a lot of this metric oriented selling, which we, definitely subscribe to at Heap. I think it's figuring out, like, people think about close rate as one metric, right? And like you said, it's from proposal to close. Okay, who's outside of that band? Then it comes down to, let's go do some inspection. Is this a rep issue? Is this a knowledge gap issue? And then you figure out the plan from there, which is like better one-on-one coaching, ride alongs, Ross, like you said, in individual deals and stand up, or this is like a whole enablement exercise. And then when you have the constant measurement of those metrics, it's just figuring out what is most broken, and then what are we going to prioritize focusing, right? And that becomes the manager's job. That becomes the sales leader's job.
Got it. Ross, any kind of closing thoughts there?
No, I think it's funny. I used to think about this as like just hiring the right person, getting them in, and like just getting a team of those folks. And like that's not at all the case of what it takes, even on smaller sales organizations, to be successful. So yeah, you need to be investing in these things. And again, like, it's hard. It takes a lot of work, but it pays off massively. Especially when, every deal matters these days. So
yeah, I think the thing that I would note is that it's really just a continuous like feedback loop where you're or like iteration loop where you're identifying your idea like on the plus side and also on the minus side. On the plus side, you're identifying areas of outperformance, like root causing where it's coming from, saying, oh, that's dope, let's systematize that. And the same is true on the other side as well. Like, oh, what's going on with you? Like, why are you under-attaining from a booking standpoint? Why are you under-attaining from an opportunity creation standpoint? Debugging what it is. Oh, there's a thing, fix it, and then congratulations, there's going to be a next problem. Like it never ends. It's just you're continuing to do that. And so just like being comfortable with the fact that like that is your job, doing that OODA loop is kind of like what it is that you do as a sales leader. This is actually, this is the craft of sales management and sales leadership. And this is one of the reasons why we like to offer people to come to our Richard Harris Bootcamp that we host monthly. So we'll go ahead and drop the link here. Hannah, was there anything else that we needed to cover?
No, not at all. I just wanted to say thank you, Todd, Ross, and Pete. This content was great. I think you guys dove into a lot of really awesome points about identifying, standardizing, and scaling the success of top reps. So I hope attendees, you all feel like you got some awesome takeaways from today. We'll follow up with the recording and key takeaways within 24 hours. And I appreciate you all. Hope to see you next time. Cheers.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, guys.
Thanks, Anna. See you, everyone.